The sun hung low over Ouagadougou, casting a golden glow across the sprawling capital of Burkina Faso. Dust swirled gently in the streets, where vendors hawked roasted corn and children darted between motorbikes, their laughter a fleeting melody against the hum of a city in motion. In the heart of this vibrant chaos stood a modest government building, its faded white walls a testament to years of resilience. Inside, a young man sat at a desk, cluttered with papers, his brow furrowed as he read a letter that would change everything. Ibrahim Traoré, at just 37, was no ordinary leader. Barely 3 years into his presidency, he had already become a symbol of a new Africa, one that dared to dream beyond the shadows of its colonial past. His military fatigues, always impeccably pressed, were a nod to his roots as a soldier, but it was his piercing gaze and quiet intensity that commanded attention. Traoré was a man of few words, but when he spoke, the world listened. And today, the world was about to hear something extraordinary. The letter in his hands was worn at the edges, as if it had traveled 1,000 miles before reaching him. It was written in a hurried scrawl, the ink smudged in places, but the words were clear. A plea from a young woman named Amina Diallo, one of thousands of Africans deported from the United States. Amina, born in Mali but raised in Chicago, had been torn from her life and sent back to a continent she barely knew. Her story was not unique. Hundreds of others faced the same fate, arriving in West Africa with nothing but the clothes on their backs, their dreams shattered by a system that saw them as disposable. Traoré's jaw tightened as he read Amina's words. They took everything from me, my home, my job, my future. I am a stranger in my own land, and I am begging you, President Traoré, to give us a chance to live again. He set the letter down, his fingers lingering on the page. Outside, the city pulsed with life, but in that moment, Traoré's world was silent, his mind racing with a single thought: this cannot stand. He had heard the stories before, deportees arriving at airports in Bamako, Dakar and Accra, their faces etched with despair. The United States, under a new wave of immigration crackdowns, had intensified deportations, citing national security and economic burdens. But Traoré saw through the rhetoric. To him, this was not about policy, it was about power. It was about a Western world that still viewed Africa as a dumping ground, a place to discard those it deemed unworthy, and he was done accepting it. Traoré leaned back in his chair, his eyes drifting to a framed map of Africa on the wall. It was not the map of colonial borders, carved up by European powers in the 19th century, but a vision of a united continent, its nations bound by shared history and ambition. He had sworn to protect that vision, to build an Africa that stood tall, not on the charity of foreign aid, but on the strength of its people, and now Amina's letter had given him a chance to prove it. He pressed a button on his desk, summoning his chief advisor, Kofi Mensah, a wiry man with graying hair and a mind as sharp as a blade. Kofi entered, his expression curious but guarded. "Mr. President," he said, bowing slightly, "you look troubled." Traoré held up the letter. "Read this," he said, his voice low but firm, "and tell me why we are still allowing our people to be treated like garbage." Kofi scanned the page, his face darkening with each line. When he finished, he looked up, his eyes meeting Traoré's. "This is bigger than one woman," he said. "There are thousands like her. The Americans are sending them back without warning, without support. And the NGOs, USAID, the UN, they're doing nothing but issuing press releases." Traoré stood, pacing to the window. Below, a group of women balanced baskets of mangoes on their heads, their colorful dresses swaying in the breeze. He thought of Amina, of the countless others like her, stranded in a land they had been taught to forget. "We will not wait for their pity," he said, turning to Kofi. "We will act. Call a press conference. I want the world to know what we're going to do." Kofi hesitated. "Sir, this could provoke the Americans. They won't take kindly to being called out." Traoré's lips curled into a faint smile, but his eyes were steel. "Good," he said. "Let them squirm." The press conference was held the next morning in the courtyard of the presidential palace, a sprawling complex adorned with baobab trees and murals of Burkina Faso's revolutionary heroes. Journalists from across Africa and beyond crowded the space, their cameras flashing as Traoré stepped onto a makeshift stage. He wore no tie, no suit, just his signature fatigues, a symbol of his refusal to conform to Western expectations of leadership. The crowd hushed as he raised a hand, holding Amina's letter aloft. "Yesterday," he began, his voice steady but laced with emotion, "I received a letter from a young woman named Amina Diallo. She is one of thousands of our brothers and sisters deported from the United States, cast out like refuse. They were born on this continent, but they are strangers here, stripped of their homes, their dignity, their hope. And I say to you now, this will not stand." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Traoré paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "The West believes Africa is a place to discard its problems," he continued. "They send us their waste, their wars, their unwanted. But I am here to tell them, Africa is not your dumping ground. Africa is a home, a future, a force. And today, I am making a promise to Amina and every deportee. You are not forgotten, you are not forsaken, you are ours, and we will give you a chance to rebuild." The journalists erupted in questions, but Traoré raised a hand, silencing them. "Starting tomorrow," he said, "we will welcome every deportee who arrives in Burkina Faso. We will give them land, tools, and seeds to farm. We will build communities where they can thrive, not just survive. And we will do this not with foreign aid, not with IMF loans, but with our own hands, our own hearts, our own will." The announcement sent shockwaves across the globe. Social media exploded with hashtags like Traoré for Africa and Welcome Home as young Africans shared clips of the speech. In New York, analysts on cable news debated the implications, with some calling Traoré a dangerous populist and others hailing him as a visionary. In Washington, the State Department issued a terse statement, warning of diplomatic consequences if Traoré continued to provoke tensions. But the real storm was brewing closer to home. That evening, as Traoré reviewed plans for the resettlement program, Kofi burst into his office, his face pale. "Mr. President," he said, breathless, "we have a problem. The letter, it's gone viral." Traoré frowned. "That was the point, Kofi. We wanted the world to know." Kofi shook his head. "No, sir. It's not just the speech. Someone leaked Amina's letter online. Her full name, her story, her photo. It's everywhere. And now she's getting threats." Traoré's heart sank. He had meant to protect Amina, to give her a voice, but in the age of the internet, nothing stayed private. He grabbed his phone, pulling up X, where Amina's letter was trending. Beneath the posts were comments, some supportive, but others vicious, accusing her of begging or shaming Africa. Worse, a few hinted at darker intentions, with anonymous accounts posting her last known location in Bamako. "Who did this?" Traoré demanded, his voice a low growl. Kofi hesitated. "We don't know yet. It could be a hacker, a rival, or even someone inside our team. But Amina's in danger, and the deportees are scared. If we don't act fast, this could spiral." Traoré clenched his fists, his mind racing. He had promised to protect his people, but now his bold move had put one of them at risk. He thought of Amina's words, her plea for a chance to live again. He couldn't let her down, not now, not ever. "Find her," he said, his voice resolute. "Get her to Ouagadougou and find out who leaked that letter. I want answers by morning." The next 48 hours were a whirlwind. Traoré's team worked around the clock, coordinating with Malian authorities to locate Amina. She was found in a cramped hostel in Bamako, her belongings stuffed into a single backpack, her eyes wide with fear. A small security detail, led by Captain Mariam Sow, a no-nonsense officer who had served under Traoré in his military days, escorted her to Burkina Faso. When Amina arrived in Ouagadougou, Traoré was there to greet her, his presence calming her nerves. "You're safe now," he said, his voice soft but firm, "and you're home." Amina, barely 25, looked at him with a mix of awe and exhaustion. Her braids were pulled back, revealing a face marked by sleepless nights. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she whispered. "I just wanted a chance." Traoré placed a hand on her shoulder. "You've given us more than that," he said. "You've given us a reason to fight." But the crisis was far from over. The leak had sparked a firestorm of controversy, with Western media outlets spinning the story to paint Traoré as reckless, accusing him of exploiting deportees for political gain. In Burkina Faso, opposition leaders seized the opportunity, claiming Traoré's plan was a publicity stunt that would bankrupt the country. Even some of his allies whispered doubts, warning that the resettlement program was too ambitious, too risky. Traoré listened to the criticism, but he refused to waver. He spent hours with Amina, hearing her story in full, her childhood in Mali, her teenage years in Chicago, her job as a nurse before the deportation order came. She spoke of the humiliation of being handcuffed at the airport, of the fear of returning to a country she barely remembered. But she also spoke of hope, of a dream to build something new, to prove she was more than a statistic. Her words stayed with Traoré as he worked late into the night, sketching out plans for the resettlement program. He envisioned not just farms, but entire communities, schools, clinics, markets built by and for deportees. He reached out to local farmers, engineers, and entrepreneurs, rallying them to the cause. "This is our moment," he told them. "If we can show the world that Africa can take care of its own, we can change everything." Meanwhile, Kofi's investigation into the leak bore fruit. The culprit was a low-level aide named Moussa Kone, who had sold Amina's letter to a foreign journalist for a quick payout. When confronted, Moussa broke down, claiming he needed the money for his sick mother. Traoré listened, his face unreadable, as Moussa begged for forgiveness. "You betrayed your people," Traoré said, his voice heavy with disappointment. "But you are still one of us. You will work to make this right." Instead of prison, Traoré assigned Moussa to the resettlement program under strict supervision. It was a decision that raised eyebrows, but Traoré believed in second chances, not just for deportees, but for those who had lost their way. The resettlement program launched with a ceremony in a rural region 50 miles north of Ouagadougou. The land, once barren, had been prepared by local volunteers who had dug irrigation channels and built temporary shelters. Traoré stood before a crowd of deportees, volunteers and journalists, Amina at his side. The air was thick with anticipation, the scent of freshly turned earth mingling with the heat of the midday sun. "Today," Traoré declared, "we are not just giving you land, we are giving you a future. You are not deportees, you are builders, dreamers, the heart of Africa. And together, we will show the world what we are capable of." He handed Amina a deed to a plot of land, her name written in bold letters. She clutched it to her chest, tears streaming down her face as the crowd erupted in cheers. One by one, other deportees stepped forward, receiving their own deeds, their own chance to start anew. The ceremony was broadcast live, trending across X and YouTube, with millions watching as Traoré knelt to plant the first seed in the soil, a symbolic act that captured the world's imagination. But the real work was just beginning. Over the next months, Traoré threw himself into the program, visiting the resettlement sites weekly, working alongside the deportees to build homes and plant crops. Amina emerged as a leader, organizing the women to start a cooperative that sold vegetables at local markets. Moussa, under Traoré's watchful eye, redeemed himself by designing a solar-powered irrigation system, earning the respect of his peers. The program faced challenges, droughts, supply shortages, and skepticism from abroad, but Traoré's vision held firm. He rejected offers of aid from USAID and the IMF, insisting that Africa could fund its own future. Instead, he partnered with African entrepreneurs who donated equipment and expertise. Slowly but surely, the resettlement sites grew into thriving communities, with schools opening and children laughing in the streets. The world took notice. In Europe, activists hailed Traoré as a hero, while in the United States, grassroots movements demanded an end to deportations. Even some of Traoré's critics began to soften, impressed by the tangible results of his bold gamble. But Traoré cared little for the praise. His focus remained on the people on Amina, on the deportees, on the dream of a self-reliant Africa. 1 year later, Traoré returned to the resettlement site for a celebration. The once barren land was now a patchwork of green fields, dotted with homes and a small clinic. Amina, now a community leader, welcomed him with a smile, her confidence a far cry from the frightened woman he had met a year ago. The crowd gathered around a bonfire, sharing stories of their journey, their voices rising in song. As the night wore on, Amina took Traoré aside, handing him a letter. "This is for you," she said, "from all of us." Traoré opened it, his eyes scanning the words. It was a thank you note, signed by every deportee in the community, expressing gratitude for the chance to rebuild their lives. But it was the final line that brought a lump to his throat. "You are not just our president, you are our father, our brother, our home." For the first time in public, Traoré's composure broke. He wiped a tear from his cheek, his voice barely a whisper as he said, "This is why we fight." The celebration continued, but Traoré slipped away, standing alone under the stars. He thought of the challenges ahead, the diplomatic tensions, the economic pressures, the weight of a continent's hopes. But he also thought of Amina, of the fields, of the future they were building together. And in that moment, he knew this was only the beginning. The story of Traoré's resettlement program spread far beyond Burkina Faso, inspiring other African nations to launch similar initiatives. It became a symbol of resistance, of pride, of a continent reclaiming its destiny. And though the world would never be the same, one thing was certain. Ibrahim Traoré, the soldier, turned visionary, had given his people something greater than land. He had given them hope.